In an age defined by digital connectivity, where relationships often begin with a swipe or a message, there lies a hidden vulnerability. This era, while offering unprecedented access to global connections, also presents new, insidious avenues for calculated manipulation and severe predation. It forces a chilling and deeply unsettling question to the forefront of our collective awareness. What happens when someone's seduction becomes a trap? This narrative delves into treacherous realm where the carefully constructed illusion of online charm transforms, with a terrifying swiftness, into real-world peril, exposing the dark, malevolent potential that lies hidden within seemingly innocent digital interactions. It is a story not merely of a crime, but of calculated deception, of trust profoundly misplaced, and of the horrifying consequences that unfold when human vulnerability is systematically exploited with a cold, malevolent intent. The initial promise of connection and companionship rapidly dissolves into a nightmarish scenario, highlighting profound risks of a digital landscape, where identities can be easily fabricated and intentions meticulously concealed. The focus of this harrowing case is the man targeted, David Miller, whose life, like countless others across the globe, unfolded within the comfortable, often predictable routines and rhythms of modern urban existence. David, a dedicated and proficient software engineer, spent the majority of his working hours primarily from his home office, nestled within a vibrant and bustling metropolitan city. His daily routine was consistent and largely structured, characterized by long, focused hours at his computer, deeply immersed in complex coding projects, interspersed with regular visits to a local gym to maintain his physical well-being, and occasional outings with a close, established circle of friends. His lifestyle was characterized by a blend of professional dedication, a comfortable independence, and a preference for quiet, reflective evenings. He enjoyed engaging with various online communities related to his professional interests, exploring new digital platforms, and occasionally indulging in a good book or a documentary. There was nothing outwardly remarkable or overtly unusual about David's life. He was, in essence, an ordinary individual navigating the digital landscape, a normalcy that would later make the unique and sinister circumstances of his targeting all the more unsettling and impactful. He was not actively seeking out trouble or engaging in risky behaviors. He was simply existing, connecting, and pursuing his interests in a manner consistent with millions of contemporaries. In the expansive and often anonymous realm of online interaction, David maintained a measured but active presence across various widely used social media and messaging platforms. Snippets of his online activity might have included professional posts about his latest coding projects, thoughtful updates on local cultural events, or perhaps casual, light-hearted interactions with friends and acquaintances. These digital breadcrumbs, seemingly innocuous and typical, inadvertently offered a glimpse into his personality, his interests, and his overall disposition, inadvertently creating a profile that, while public, was also tragically accessible to those with malicious intent. His online presence was, by all accounts, entirely typical, reflecting a natural human desire for connection, engagement, and shared experiences, without any conscious indication of the sinister attention it would eventually attract. This established his perceived normalcy and innocence to a discerning observer, portraying him as an average, unsuspecting individual navigating the digital landscape, utterly unaware of the lurking dangers that lay dormant within its vast, intricate web. He was not overtly seeking out trouble. He was simply engaging with the world, as many do in the modern era, leaving a digital trail that would ultimately be exploited against him. To establish a deeper emotional connection with David, and to fully underscore the profound betrayal he would endure, the narrative strategically utilizes introductory video or photo visuals. These carefully selected images would depict various aspects of his everyday life, painting a comprehensive picture of his existence. Perhaps a candid shot of him deeply focused while working at a computer, a brief video clip of him laughing genuinely with friends during a casual social gathering, or a serene snapshot of him enjoying a quiet moment pursuing a personal hobby. These visuals would subtly, yet powerfully, humanize David, allowing the audience to form an immediate and empathetic emotional connection with him as they witnessed the mundane normalcy and quiet contentment of his existence before it was so tragically disrupted. They serve a crucial purpose: to highlight the stark and terrifying contrast between his unsuspecting, ordinary reality and the calculated, malevolent deception that was about to unfold with devastating consequences. The overarching goal is to establish David not as a mere statistic or a faceless victim in a crime report, but as a real person with real life, real dreams, and real relationships, making the subsequent events of his ensnarement and the horrific outcome profoundly impactful and emotionally resonant for the viewer. This foundational understanding of David's normalcy is paramount to grasping the full tragedy of the Honeytrap that awaited him. As David Miller continued to navigate his ordinary digital life, an unseen and insidious plot was already in motion. The focus now shifts to the architect of this deception, the woman who would meticulously lure him into a deadly snare. This was not a chance encounter, but a calculated operation, a honey trap designed with precision and malevolent intent. The narrative introduces a woman who lures him, a figure carefully constructed to appeal to David's specific profile and vulnerabilities. Her online persona would have been crafted to exude an irresistible charm, an aura of intrigue and relatable warmth. Her profile pictures would be aesthetically pleasing, perhaps featuring a combination of sophisticated and approachable imagery. Her online biography would hint at shared interests or experiences that resonated with David's own life, creating an immediate sense of connection and compatibility. This carefully curated digital identity was her primary tool, designed to bypass initial skepticism and foster a sense of genuine connection. She may have presented herself as someone in a similar professional field or with similar hobbies, making her seem like an ideal match. The initial point of contact would have been strategically chosen. The story details how they meet, typically through widely used digital platforms where anonymity provides a veil for malicious intentions. This could have been a popular messaging app where casual conversation can quickly deepen, a ubiquitous social media platform where mutual friends or common interests can be fabricated, or a dedicated dating platform, explicitly designed for romantic connections. The method of introduction was chosen to appear organic and legitimate, blending seamlessly into David's existing online habits. She might have initiated contact with a seemingly innocent comment on one of his public posts, or a polite message expressing interest based on his profile information. Her initial messages would be disarmingly friendly, gradually escalating in warmth and personal revelation, creating a sense of intimacy that was entirely manufactured. The narration underscores a deceptive allure and facade, emphasizing the layers of artifice beneath her charming exterior. Her written communication would be engaging, perhaps witty and insightful, designed to captivate David's attention and stimulate his interest. If video calls were introduced later in the interaction, her visual presentation would be equally compelling, designed to project an image of trustworthiness, attractiveness, and genuine interest. This facade was meticulously maintained, a consistent performance intended to build rapport and emotional investment. She would adapt her communication style to match David's, mirroring his interests and values to create a stronger illusion of compatibility. Every message, every shared anecdote, every perceived emotional connection was a calculated move, part of a larger strategy to draw him deeper into the trap. The goal was to create a convincing illusion of a burgeoning relationship, exploiting the human desire for companionship and romantic connection. She would project an image of vulnerability or shared dreams, drawing David in emotionally, making him feel that he was building a special bond with someone truly unique. As the interaction progressed, the narrative begins to build tension by hinting that something isn't right early on. These were subtle, almost imperceptible inconsistencies that, in retrospect, served as crucial warning signs. These might include odd requests that, while not immediately alarming, deviated slightly from typical online courtship. For example, she might frequently ask for specific details about his daily routine, his financial situation, or his home security, framing these as casual curiosities born of genuine interest. She might inquire about his schedule, his work hours, or when he would be alone, cloaking these questions under the guise of planning a future meeting or expressing concern for his well-being. These questions would be delivered with such practiced charm that David, eager to impress and engage, would likely not perceive their intrusive nature. Another significant red flag was her consistent avoidance of real-life meetups, particularly in public, well-populated locations. While she might express enthusiasm for meeting, there would always be a convenient excuse for postponement or for suggesting alternative, more isolated venues. Her reasons for delaying could be plausible: a sudden work trip, a family emergency, or a vague illness. Each postponement, however, would be accompanied by increased digital intimacy, pushing the connection deeper online, while resisting any tangible real-world interaction in a safe environment. This pattern of avoidance served to maintain control, keeping David in a state of hopeful anticipation, while preventing any situation where her true identity or intentions could be revealed. This created a profound dissonance, an escalating emotional connection in the digital space, contrasted with persistent elusiveness in the real world. These subtle yet persistent inconsistencies, meticulously crafted into the narrative, serve as early indicators that David was not engaging with a genuine individual, but with a carefully constructed honey trap, slowly tightening its grip. The stage was set for the next phase, where the deception would become more pronounced and the red flags more apparent. As the honey trap tightened its invisible grip, the deceptive allure of the woman's online persona evolved, moving beyond mere initial charm into a more intricate and emotionally manipulative phase. David Miller, increasingly invested in what he believed was a genuine connection, found himself drawn deeper into a web of digital intimacy that disguised a sinister purpose. This period marked the escalation of deceit, where the lines between reality and fabrication blurred, and the subtle red flags began to multiply. The interaction between David and the woman intensified, becoming a dominant feature of his daily life. She orchestrated growing interactions, ensuring a constant flow of communication that kept him engaged and emotionally dependent. This involved a barrage of suggestive messages, carefully crafted to foster romantic attraction and a sense of shared intimacy. These messages were not overtly explicit, but rather hinted at deeper desires, shared fantasies, and a longing for physical closeness. They might include flattering compliments, expressions of longing for future encounters, or intimate revelations that seemed to bridge the digital divide. The language used would be warm, personal, and increasingly affectionate, designed to evoke a strong emotional response from David. This constant stream of suggestive communication served to build an intense emotional bond, making David feel cherished and desired, further blinding him to the underlying deception. The very frequency of these messages created a sense of urgency and importance, making her presence feel constant and integral to his day. Beyond text-based exchanges, the woman might introduce video calls, carefully controlled to maintain her deceptive facade while increasing David's emotional investment. These calls would be strategically managed, perhaps short, infrequent, or always initiated by her, ensuring she controlled the visual environment and could present herself in a flattering, trustworthy light. She might use filters or strategically angled shots to enhance her appearance or obscure any inconsistencies. The purpose of these video calls was to provide a visual reinforcement of her online persona, to make her seem more real and tangible, thereby solidifying David's belief in the authenticity of their connection. While she controlled the visual narrative, the calls provided just enough visual confirmation to deepen David's perceived intimacy, making him believe he was truly getting to know her. These interactions, while limited, played a crucial role in building his trust and accelerating his emotional investment, creating a powerful illusion of a burgeoning, passionate relationship. However, despite the escalating intimacy and the carefully constructed illusion, subtle red flags began to emerge, detectable only by a keen observer, and often dismissed by David himself in his increasing infatuation. These discrepancies were not overt, but rather small, almost imperceptible inconsistencies that, when viewed collectively, hinted at a deeper deception. One such red flag was noticeable changes in her tone across different communications. While generally affectionate, there might be moments where her tone would become surprisingly cold, dismissive, or even demanding when certain topics were broached, perhaps questions about her background, her location, or requests for more concrete information. These fleeting shifts in demeanor would quickly be masked by a return to her usual charm, leaving David to dismiss them as momentary quirks or misunderstandings. These tonal shifts, however, were indicators of a carefully managed performance, momentarily slipping when her carefully constructed facade was challenged. Another significant red flag involved discrepancies in her story. Over time, subtle inconsistencies would surface in the details she shared about her life, her past, or her circumstances. A detail mentioned casually in one conversation might contradict something stated earlier, or her answers to follow-up questions might be vague or evasive. Perhaps a timeline she described for an event wouldn't quite align, or a detail about her professional background might subtly change. These were not glaring falsehoods, but rather small, incremental inconsistencies that, if examined closely, would reveal the fabricated nature of her identity. David, blinded by his growing emotional investment, might subconsciously ignore these discrepancies or rationalize them away as minor memory lapses. Her evasive behavior became a persistent red flag, particularly concerning real-world interactions or verifiable information. While she continued to express a desire to meet, her excuses for avoiding in-person encounters would become increasingly elaborate and frequent. She might consistently decline video calls at certain times, or avoid sharing contact information beyond the messaging app. Requests for details about her address, her workplace, or even a simple public social media profile would be met with clever diversions or vague explanations. This evasiveness created a persistent barrier to any form of verifiable, real-world connection, indicating a deliberate effort to remain anonymous and untraceable. Each act of evasion, while seemingly minor on its own, served to maintain the integrity of her deception, preventing David from confirming any details that might expose her true intentions. Despite these accumulating red flags, David became increasingly invested. The emotional manipulation, the constant flow of affectionate messages, and the tantalizing promise of a future together had woven a powerful spell. His conversations with friends or family might increasingly revolve around this new, captivating woman, reflecting his deepening emotional preoccupation. He might dismiss their concerns about her elusive nature, convinced that her reasons were legitimate and that their connection was special. This investment went beyond mere romantic interest. It became a significant emotional and psychological commitment. He began to dedicate substantial time and energy to their digital relationship, sacrificing other social engagements or personal pursuits to maintain the constant communication she demanded. This emotional investment was precisely what the Honeytrap intended, rendering David vulnerable and increasingly susceptible to her ultimate command. The stage was now set for the final lethal transition, where the digital fantasy would violently collide with a horrifying reality. The carefully orchestrated escalation of deceit had achieved its intended purpose. David Miller was deeply emotionally invested, his trust meticulously cultivated, and his skepticism subtly eroded by the woman's deceptive allure. The stage was now set for the transition from a purely digital manipulation to a real-world, physical trap. The narrator's chilling warning encapsulates this shift. What began as seduction turned deadly. This was the point where the online fantasy violently collided with a horrifying, calculated reality, leading David directly into mortal danger. The climax of the deception centered on the woman's invitation, a pivotal moment that cemented David's fate. She extended a compelling invite for a long-awaited in-person meeting, crafted to appear as a natural progression of their intense digital romance. This invitation would have been presented as a deeply personal and exclusive opportunity, perhaps suggesting a romantic getaway, a private celebration, or a secluded rendezvous designed to deepen their connection away from the prying eyes of the world. Her persuasive language would have tapped into David's emotional investment, making the invitation seem irresistible and the culmination of their online courtship. She might have expressed her excitement and anticipation, reinforcing the idea that this meeting was a significant step in their relationship. The nature of the invitation itself, promising intimacy and an exclusive experience, would have subtly disarmed any lingering caution David might have harbored. Crucially, this invitation was to an isolated location. This was not a public restaurant, a bustling cafe, or a familiar city park. The chosen said it would be remote, difficult to access, and far from immediate help or witnesses. It might be a rented cabin in a secluded forest, a seemingly abandoned rural property, a remote industrial site, or even a distant, unfamiliar residential address far outside David's usual haunts. The isolation was a deliberate tactical choice, designed to maximize the perpetrator's control and minimize any chance of intervention or escape. The woman would provide precise directions, perhaps even offering to pick David up or guide him there, ensuring he had no opportunity to deviate or involve others. The very secrecy and remoteness of the location, presented by her as romantic or adventurous, served to conceal the true, sinister purpose of the meeting. This choice of venue transformed the romantic proposition into a premeditated ambush, making the victim profoundly vulnerable and isolated. As David approached or arrived at the secluded destination, the suspense began to rise palpably, signaled by increasingly ominous audio and visuals. The background score would shift from a gentle, alluring tone to an ominous music track, slowly building a sense of foreboding dread. The sound design would subtly introduce unsettling elements: the distant hoot of an owl, the creak of an unseen door, or the muffled sound of wind through desolate trees. Visually, the journey to the location would be depicted through shaky reenactment footage, mirroring David's subconscious unease or the growing tension of the impending danger. The camera work would create a sense of disorientation and vulnerability, perhaps focusing on the unfamiliarity of the surroundings, the increasing darkness, or the oppressive quiet of the isolated area. As David neared the location, the visuals might include quick cuts between his unsuspecting arrival and glimpses of the woman in the isolated setting, her earlier alluring facade now replaced by a cold, calculating expression, perhaps handling an object that hints at a hidden agenda. The lighting would become stark and unnatural, casting long, unsettling shadows that play on the viewer's fear of the unknown. The narration would emphasize a growing sense of dread, highlighting the shift from romantic anticipation to a chilling premonition. David might experience a subtle prickle of fear, a fleeting thought that something was amiss, but by this point, his emotional investment and a meticulously constructed illusion would have overshadowed his instincts. He would be walking into a trap, his senses registering danger, but his mind still caught in the web of the Honeytrap's promise. The very air would feel heavy with an unspoken threat, the silence more menacing than any noise. The isolated setting became a stage for betrayal, where the illusion of connection was about to shatter, revealing the true, horrific intent lurking beneath the surface. This was a moment of no return, where the carefully constructed seduction dissolved, exposing the deadly trap that awaited David. The pervasive sense of dread, meticulously woven into David Miller's journey to the isolated location, now solidified into a horrifying reality. The meticulously constructed Honeytrap, having successfully lured him into its clutches, was about to unleash its true, violent purpose. This segment details a horrific outcome, the brutal culmination of calculated deception and malevolent intent. The climax unfolded with devastating speed and brutality, a violent explosion after weeks of subtle manipulation. This was the reenactment of the attack, a terrifying sequence defined by its sudden violence and the victim's overwhelming shock. As David found himself in the isolated setting, perhaps expecting an intimate encounter, the carefully crafted illusion shattered. The perpetrator or accomplices revealed themselves, abandoning the alluring facade for a chilling display of aggression. The violence would erupt without warning, a complete surprise to David, who was psychologically unprepared for such a stark betrayal. The initial moments would be characterized by sheer disbelief and an immediate, overwhelming sense of terror. The suddenness of the assault would prevent any opportunity for rational thought or effective self-defense, highlighting the victim's utter vulnerability once ensnared. The narrative employs quick-cut visuals to convey the chaos and panic of the attack, immersing the viewer in a disorienting experience. These rapid, disjointed images might show flashes of struggle, the glint of a weapon, or the frantic movements of assailants. The camera work would be deliberately jarring, reflecting the disorientation and fear David would have experienced in those terrifying moments. Complementing these visuals, carefully selected sound effects would build a visceral sense of panic and danger. The muffled sounds of struggle, sharp impacts, or gasping breaths would heighten the auditory tension without relying on explicit detail. The objective is to convey the terror and brutality of the assault through implication and atmosphere, rather than gratuitous depiction, allowing the audience's imagination to fill in the harrowing blanks. The environment, once presented as a romantic hideaway, would transform into a claustrophobic death trap, its isolation now serving the perpetrator's sinister agenda. The attack would be depicted as overwhelming, designed to quickly incapacitate or eliminate the victim. This often involved elements of surprise, overwhelming force, or the use of weapons to ensure the victim had no chance of resistance. The nature of the violence would underscore the perpetrator's intent, not just robbery, but a complete silencing of the victim, a definitive end to the threat of exposure. The visual and auditory cues would emphasize the sudden loss of control, the swift progression from anticipation to terror, and the horrifying realization that the romantic encounter was, in fact, a carefully planned ambush. Central to the tragedy of the horrific outcome was a profound betrayal of trust. David's vulnerability stemmed directly from his emotional investment in the deceptive relationship. He had allowed himself to be drawn in, to believe in the authenticity of the connection, and to follow the woman to a secluded location based on that trust. The attack represented the ultimate violation of that trust, transforming a promise of intimacy into an act of violence. The narrative would highlight the psychological impact of this betrayal, emphasizing how the perpetrator leveraged human desires for connection against the victim. This wasn't merely a physical assault. It was an ambush rooted in a carefully constructed psychological manipulation, making the horror of the event even more profound. The realization that the person he had developed feelings for, the individual with whom he had shared intimate conversations and future hopes, was merely a deceptive instrument of harm, compounded the terror of the attack. This profound betrayal underscored the insidious nature of Honeytrap schemes, where the weapon is not just physical force, but the very human capacity for trust and emotional connection. The victim's shock was not just from the violence, but from the shattering of a fabricated reality, revealing the cold, calculating malice that lay beneath the veneer of seduction. The violence of the isolated location ceased, leaving behind a chilling stillness that now replaced the sounds of struggle and terror. The immediate horror of the attack gave way to the grim reality of its consequences, setting the stage for the formal processes of law enforcement and justice, and, ultimately, a somber reflection on the dangers lurking within the digital realm. The aftermath discovery commenced as the crime was eventually revealed. This might begin with concerned loved one reporting David missing after unanswered calls or unexplained absences from his routine. The absence would lead to a search, perhaps utilizing his phone's last known location data or tracing the unusual journey to the isolated site. The moment the crime scene was found, the atmosphere would shift dramatically. Emergency responders arrived with urgency, their vehicles piercing the rural silence, their flashing lights illuminating the scene of devastation. Crime scene footage would depict the initial efforts to secure the area, the methodical laying of forensic markers, and the somber realization of the tragedy that had occurred. The environment, which had served as a trap, was now a canvas for meticulous investigation. Evidence is documented with painstaking detail. Injuries sustained by David, providing crucial insights into the nature and ferocity of the attack. The discovery of a weapon or weapons used, which would be carefully bagged and analyzed, and precise location details of a secluded site, critical for mapping the crime and understanding the perpetrator's planning. The initial findings would guide the immediate investigative steps. The narration would then set a somber tone about the gravity of the act, emphasizing the irreversible loss and profound violation that had taken place, not just of David's life, but the very concept of trust in digital relationships. The focus here will be on the meticulous, professional approach of first responders and investigators, ensuring every piece of the puzzle is preserved. With the immediate scene secured, law enforcement takes center stage in the investigation and arrest. This phase is a systematic unraveling of the deception, leveraging digital forensics and traditional police work. The critical first steps involve gathering digital evidence. Investigators will meticulously analyze David's messages and call logs on various platforms, meticulously reconstructing the entire deceptive courtship. Every message, every picture, every video call, every exchange phone number will be scrutinized, building a comprehensive timeline of the Honeytrap's progression. This digital footprint provided irrefutable proof of the woman's identity, or at least her online alias, and her methodical manipulation of David. Simultaneously, physical evidence from the crime scene would be processed. DNA, fingerprints, and any other forensic traces left behind by the perpetrator or accomplices. This dual approach of digital and physical evidence collection would begin to narrow down the pool of suspects. The investigative breakthroughs would be detailed, perhaps cross-referencing phone numbers with social media profiles, tracing IP addresses, or identifying unique digital habits that led back to a real individual. This diligent detective work would culminate in the suspect's arrest. The reenactment or footage of the arrest would show the precision and planning involved, a tactical team executing a raid, the suspect being taken into custody, perhaps handcuffed and escorted, stripped of their power. The narrator details key investigative breakthroughs that led to this apprehension, explaining how seemingly disparate pieces of evidence were linked to identify and locate the perpetrator, showcasing the relentless pursuit of justice by law enforcement. The identification of the suspect, often revealing a surprisingly ordinary individual behind the malicious online persona, adds another layer of chilling reality to the story. The apprehension of the suspect initiated the formal legal proceedings and the pursuit of justice. This segment would cover the key court developments, beginning with the formal charges brought against the perpetrator. These charges would likely include multiple counts of murder, potentially with aggravating factors such as premeditation and exploitation of vulnerability, indicating a deliberate and calculated act rather than a crime of impulse. The judicial process would be outlined, from initial arraignment to the grand jury indictment, and finally to the trial. Possible trial footage or courtroom reenactment would immerse the viewer in the solemnity and gravity of the legal environment. Key moments of the trial will be highlighted: the prosecution presenting the overwhelming digital and forensic evidence, the testimony of experts explaining the mechanics of Honeytrap schemes, and perhaps the impact statement of David's family and friends. The defense strategy would be briefly noted, perhaps attempting to argue coercion or a lesser degree of intent, but ultimately, the weight of evidence would lead to an unavoidable conclusion. The verdict and sentencing would be presented with clarity, detailing the legal outcome and the consequences for the perpetrator. A guilty verdict would be delivered, followed by a sentence reflecting the heinous nature of the crime, likely life imprisonment without parole, or the maximum penalty allowed by law, ensuring the perpetrator would never again pose a threat to society. The reactions of those present, particularly David's loved ones, would be captured, a complex mix of relief that justice was served, alongside enduring sorrow for their profound loss. Finally, the narrative concludes with profound reflection and warning, drawing universal lessons from David Miller's tragic experience. An expert voiceover analysis, perhaps from a psychologist specializing in online exploitation or a cybersecurity expert, would discuss the psychological underpinnings of honeytrap schemes. This analysis would delve into the manipulative tactics employed by perpetrators, the vulnerabilities they exploit, and the psychological impact on victims. It would highlight how digital trust can be weaponized, explaining that the very mechanisms designed for connection can be twisted into tools for deception and harm. The expert might discuss the grooming process, the slow building of rapport, and the deliberate creation of false identity to ensnare victims. The final takeaway delivers a clear and urgent caution to the audience: the paramount importance of verifying identities in online interactions. This includes advising viewers to conduct basic background checks, to insist on public first meetings, to be wary of individuals who consistently avoid real-life contact or provide inconsistent information, and to trust their instincts when something feels off. The message emphasizes that the allure of online seduction can be deceptively powerful, and if not approached with extreme caution, it can indeed be deadly. The story ends with a somber, impactful final statement, a call for increased vigilance and awareness in the digital age.
Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe for more.